The Everglades National Park, a huge section of South Florida soaked by a slow-moving river that flows from the Kissimmee River Basin to Lake Okeechobee and southward to the Gulf of Mexico, Florida Bay, and the Atlantic Ocean. It's the third largest U.S. national park behind Death Valley and Yellowstone. The vast and vicious landscape that is the Everglades is teeming with wildlife and fauna that exist in a fragile harmony, embraced by a 1.5 million acre river that progresses about a quarter-mile a day. Hard to imagine? Try this. The water moves at a snail's pace of about 11 inches per minute, making it the slowest river in the world. We watched it. It looked like it was stagnant water, filled with wildlife. Alligators marking their territory sometimes groaned and then would lie still or sink into the weeds. It was mating season, and we caught one huge gator bellowing through the grass to make his presence known. This is one of the few places on Earth where alligators and crocodiles live together. The American crocodile is on the threatened and endangered species list, along with the elusive Florida panther that also roams the park. Other threatened species that live here include sea turtles, manatees, sawfish, and birds like the snail kite, spoonbill, and wood stork. We were lucky enough to see many of them. The most significant breeding ground for tropical wading birds in North America is the Everglades. The largest mangrove ecosystem in the Western Hemisphere is in the Everglades. The majority of South Florida's fresh water stored in the Biscayne Aquifer is recharged, you got it, in the Everglades. Where did this amazing ecosystem come from? It's believed 200 to 300 million years ago, the Florida Peninsula and North America separated from what is now Africa. What is now Florida drifted underwater for almost that long. As the Appalachian Mountains eroded, the sand and clay piled up on Florida's limestone layer, causing it to rise above the sea about 150,000 years ago. It bobbed above and below sea level several times as the Ice Age glaciers melted. It was a bigger and drier peninsula when the first humans saw it about 12,000 years ago. As the landmass narrowed, swamps formed. The huge peat deposits south of Lake Okeechobee indicate the lake spawned regular floods about 5,000 years ago. Plants appeared, both subtropical plants from northern Florida and tropical plants growing from seeds birds carried from the Caribbean islands. This is also when the first Native Americans arrived in the Everglades. The Tequesta people lived in a single community in what is Miami today. The Calusa had about 30 villages scattered along the western side of the peninsula, basically from Cape Sable to Tampa. The Everglades served as a natural boundary between the tribes. Both groups traveled through the Everglades, but stayed mostly along the coast. Both are believed to have practiced human sacrifice as part of their tribal rituals. These tribes were long before the Seminoles arrived. When Spain ceded Florida to Great Britain in 1763, the Spanish took the last remnants of both tribes to Cuba. What they left was the Everglades, reportedly 11,000 square miles of harsh landscape made of two types of soil. There's the peat, mentioned earlier, caused by years of decomposing plant matter that exist in areas that remain flooded for more than 9 months each year. And the other soil is marl, a grayish mud made up of dried chunks of algae, bacteria, microbes, and dead organic material. These areas are generally only flooded for 6 months or less each year. Since the seas receded and exposed the ground to air, the porous carbonate bedrock of the region has weathered. That left behind karst, a bedrock of limestone and dolomite full of pits, sinkholes, and springs. Pits called solution holes provide dry season refuge during the winter for aquatic animals, where they wait out the season until the flooding of the marsh begins again during the summer wet season. As massive and overwhelming as the Everglades may have been, covering more than 7 million acres, developers have tried to drain and urbanize the place. Those efforts began more than 150 years ago. Those first canals built did little harm to the ecosystem because they were hardly effective. Napoleon Broward became serious about the effort in his 1904 campaign for governor. He crusaded to drain the swamp and create the Empire of the Everglades. His efforts from 1905 to 1910 cleared enough land to settle the town of Davie and portions of Lee and Dade counties. The canals also created dry land for fields of sugarcane. Mangrove trees were removed to create better coastal views. They were replaced with shallow-rooted palm trees. The Army Corps of Engineers kept building bigger canals, trying to control the rising Everglades water as the planners continued to build on the cleared land. When the levees they built failed after a 1926 hurricane, hundreds living south of Lake Okeechobee drowned. 2 years later, another hurricane claimed 2,500 lives when the lake waters surged over the levees. President Herbert Hoover decided the floodwaters from Lake Okeechobee had to be stopped. He ordered a dike built. About 15 years later, in 1947, Congress declared the Everglades a national park, a place to be protected. But it was the government that posed the biggest threat to the marshland. The same year, a Category 4 hurricane caused flooding and 17 deaths when floodwaters breached the dike. Flooding from a hurricane a month later left more than 2,000 people homeless in the Miami area. Scientists actually thought they had affected the path of that storm, dropping an 80-pound block of dry ice into it from an Air Force bomber. So they raised the Hoover Dike higher still, trying to control the lake's floods. The 1,400 miles of canals and levees, gates, spillways, and pumping stations effectively cut off much of the water feeding the Everglades, dehydrating the land like a raisin in the blistering Florida sun. Less than 50% of the area, dubbed as a river of grass back when the national park was created, remains intact today. Frequent algae blooms and red tide in Biscayne Bay and the Florida Bay have been traced to the controlled water releases from Lake Okeechobee. Wading bird populations dwindled 90% from the 1940s to 2000 as the land dried. Fish became less populous in the shallow waters, killing off the food supply for other animals. Minerals and chemicals like mercury leached into the controlled water discharges, causing further wildlife deaths. Man just cannot do what nature does best. In 1989, President Bush signed an Everglades National Park Protection and Expansion Act, adding another 171 square miles of land to the park. He closed it to airboats and told the Department of the Army to restore the water flow, saying, "Through this legislation, that river of grass may now be restored to its natural flow of water." Those were nice words, but it took Congress 11 years to just approve a plan to do it. And it is still not done. The water flow is still restricted. Today, there are 3 authorized airboat businesses inside the park. They are located along the Tamiami Trail, crossing about 90 miles of Everglades from Miami to Naples before it turns north to Tampa. Developers started building the Tamiami Trail in 1915. 13 years, $8 million, and 2.6 million sticks of dynamite later, they had a road that bisects the park. When the state of Florida ran out of money to build it in 1922, advertising mogul Baron Collier pledged to bankroll the road if the state would create a new county and name it after him. That is how the Tamiami Trail and Collier County came about. Driving that road today, you'll see the Miccosukee tribe has built a resort and casino in the swamp. Operating since 1999, the resort has hundreds of rooms, banquet facilities, and a golf and country club, and lots of gaming machines. Gambling is not the only thing that has invaded the Everglades. Bromeliads, or air plants, are one of the iconic resources of the park. These native plants are members of the pineapple family and are found in almost all Everglades habitats. Their upward-shooting leaves funnel rainwater into the main plant structure. The Everglades host 10 species of carnivorous plants, like bladderworts. Our guide told us they gobble up things like mosquito larvae, helping them control the insects by snatching them in about 1/30th of a second. The Everglades are also home to many insect-eating pitcher plants. These and other native plant species are being threatened by invasive plants like Molucca trees, Brazilian peppers, and Old World climbing ferns. There are an estimated 1,000 species of plants in the park. About 200 of them are non-native. More than 200,000 acres of the park are considered infested with invasive plants, and that number is growing constantly. Invasive species of animals are also taking a toll on the already threatened ecology. Walking catfish are overtaking natural fish stocks, eating and infecting them with disease. Green iguanas are eating plants some endangered species need to survive. The lizards devour tree snails and transmit salmonella to humans via their feces. We saw one flatten a bicycle tire after a rider accidentally ran over one. The iguana walked away. And then there are the invasive Burmese pythons, African rock pythons, and yellow anacondas threatening to become the top predators in the park. A lot of this is blamed on people releasing their unwanted exotic pets in the Everglades. The snakes are being hunted. Males with trackers implanted in them are leading hunters to nest of females. The Everglades has spawned lots of folklore. Some stories are real and others remain quite unbelievable. Along with the region's amazing splendor were huge criminal dreams of opportunity. An untold number of bodies have been found shot, stabbed, mutilated, and even burned before being dumped in the Everglades. Since 1965, more than 175 unsolved homicides have been based on bodies found in the marshes. Some put the corner of the Bermuda Triangle over the Everglades, a place where planes and boats mysteriously crash or disappear. In 1972, Eastern Airlines Flight 401 crashed into the swamp, killing 101 people on board. There have been many reports of spirits haunting the crash site north of the Tamiami Trail. On the western edge of the Big Cypress Preserve, part of the Everglades watershed, is where you'll find a unique and historic sinkhole lake. Deep Lake is about 90 feet deep and is the deepest lake south of Lake Okeechobee, in fact, one of the deepest in the entire state. Studies indicate the top of it is freshwater, while the bottom of the lake is saltwater. Around 1913, the area around the lake was cleared to grow grapefruits. The modern-day trail leading to the lake is where a rail line was built to ship the fruit to market. When the original developer died, Baron Collier, the guy who financed the Tamiami Trail, bought the grove and further developed it. He even built a lodge to host parties and hunting expeditions. There's a place called the Lost City in the Broward County corner of the wetland. It's 3 acres of rotted shacks and old artifacts some think was an Al Capone hideout and a bootlegging site. During the Civil War, about 40 Confederate soldiers hid out there. Before they were killed by Native Americans, it's rumored their spirits still haunt the place. Hollywood based a movie on the story. After the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1965, the Army built a missile base in the Everglades, despite Homestead Air Force Base being just 20 miles to the east. After it was built, there were 22 buildings housing the 140 soldiers and 18 surface-to-air Nike missiles. It stayed open until 1979. The site is closed, but several buildings are still intact. When we lived in the nearby Redlands back in the early 1980s, there were rampant rumors of secret CIA training camps in the Everglades. Occasionally, we'd see teams of Hispanic males wearing military-style camouflage, carrying backpacks and military-styled weapons jogging down the railroad tracks near our house. National Park Service reports now confirm several of those camps in the Everglades did exist to train Contra rebels from Central America. A mysterious man named Edgar Watson moved to the Everglades island of Chokoloskee, where he reportedly built a sugarcane empire. Legend has it he moved there after he ambushed and killed Western outlaw Belle Starr in Oklahoma, a sidekick of Jesse James. Why did he shoot her? She reportedly refused to dance with him one night. In Florida, several other murders were blamed on Watson, including his field hands. They say he killed them rather than paying them, something that became known as a Watson payday. His notorious past eventually caught up with him when a posse gunned him down. The Watson folklore is vivid, but the facts are few and far between. Just like the very thin evidence of the creatures called gator men, half-man, half-alligator creatures that grow to about 5 feet long and travel in packs. Legends of these spooky beings date back to the 1700s. And then there's the elusive skunk apes. Growing to about 7 feet tall and 450 pounds, they're described as orangutan-like creatures with an unbearable odor of rotten eggs and methane. Supposedly, there's only about 15 of them left wandering the Florida swamps. One story, not so spooky, is that of a fiddle tune reportedly born on Loop Road just off the Tamiami Trail. Along this 30-mile, mostly dirt road was a place called the Gator Hook Lodge, a rowdy juke joint that opened around 1958. It was here Irvin Rouse, living nearby with his 2 dogs, picked up his fiddle and entertained the local crowds with his gifted and eccentric fiddle playing. Rouse authored the now famous fiddle anthem, The Orange Blossom Special, in 1938. The tune was about a passenger train that ran from New York to Miami on the Seaboard Airline Railway from 1925 to the early 1960s. Rouse wrote the song after visiting the Jacksonville train terminal and seeing the legendary train. Surprisingly, Irvin never wrote it. Still, his song, with an interplay of fiddles, guitars, banjos, and harmonicas, evokes the train's sound and speed. That train brought thousands of tourists to South Florida. No doubt many explored the Everglades. Gator Hook Lodge, where Rouse performed his music, was located on the S-curve of Loop Road and survived until 1977, when it and almost everything else man-made in the area was swallowed up by the Big Cypress Swamp. That story is typical of everything in the Everglades, a place larger than life where even the smallest things can affect everything.